I'm really excited about today's show. Our first guest, our first show, is a gentleman I've been reading for a very long time. Very, very important figure, writes a lot about the Middle East, writes a lot about Israel. He's got a new book out, fantastic new book out called And None Shall Make Them Afraid. 8 stories from the modern state of Israel. The author is Rick Richman. Rick, welcome. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Lee. It's a pleasure to be here.
Well, look, as I said, I've been reading you for a long time, and commentary. You and I have spoken on the phone. This is the first time that we've gotten to speak, seeing each other's face. So that's very nice. But I'm really excited about your books. I told you the different chapters that I've been looking at, the different the different pieces that have really moved me. I found it a really moving book. Some of the folks you're talking about, especially Theodore Herzl and Jabotinsky, and we'll get to that and we'll talk about that in a little more detail. But I'm curious just to know what sort of moved you to write this book like this. What needed to be explained to readers about Israel and about these figures?
You know, there are so many books about Israel, and they tell the story really from
Hmm.
30,000 feet up, with the story of great movements in intellectual history and political history,
Hmm.
diplomatic history, military history. But what I was trying to do was bring the story down from
Hmm.
30,000 feet all the way down to the individuals
Hmm.
who made it happen. And so the more I looked at some of the individuals, some of whom were well known, others were not known
Hmm.
at all, the more I found that the story was much more interesting if told in terms of individuals and the ideas that moved them, the efforts that they made, the extraordinary things that they accomplished. And when I put it together with the various stories, totaling 8 in this book, and there's certainly more that could be told, but 8 in this book, it became the story of Jewish history in the 20th century,
Hmm.
the history of Zionism and the isms that the 20th century produced. And I found that putting the stories together was a way into the bigger story that couldn't literally be seen from 30,000 feet up.
Right.
So what I was trying to do was take the 8 individuals who are in the book and show how Zionism, supported by Americanism,
Hmm.
created a modern miracle, and how it was done by individuals committing themselves and showing how individuals could affect history. Some of the people that are in the book are historic figures,
Hmm.
but they didn't start off as historic figures. They started as figures who were moved by ideas and moved by situations and thought they could do something about it, and they did. And some of the things they did, it turned out to be historic. But amazingly, a century later, many of the stories aren't even known. And if they're not known, they almost don't exist. And the stories I found, and I hope readers find, were amazing in themselves. Amazing that we didn't know them. Amazing that figures that we thought we knew, we didn't know really about. Amazing that there were figures that we didn't know anything about who accomplished amazing things. And so I was trying to put it all together in a single book. And what I found was that if I put these stories of individuals chronologically, one after another, with connecting paragraphs between the chapters, what I had was, in effect, a history of the last
Hmm.
125 years of the 20th century and the Jewish and
Hmm.
American role in it. Because what you find is that the 20th century was this extraordinary century of isms, of ideology, and Americanism and Zionism were the two most successful isms of that
Hmm.
extraordinarily ideological age. But the others, communism, fascism, National Socialism, anti Semitism, they murdered millions. So the story of how Zionism and Americanism changed the world in the 20th century, I thought it's a very important story for us to know, to remember, and to realize that it has current significance because the story's not over. It's a
Mm,
continuing story. So I've written a book of history, but it's really a book intended to inform the present and therefore influence the
mm,
future. Because once we know these stories and once we know what individuals can do
mm.
in history, it ought to be an inspiration to us that we too have a role to play and that people 80 or 100 years into the future will look back at us and say, what did we do given the challenges that we face and given the opportunities that we have, the means of
Mm.
communication, the political participation that wasn't available back then is available to us now. And so this is a book about a story in the past, but a story that we're creating as we speak.
It's a really remarkable book, and I love the way you describe it because that is one of the most moving things about the book, about the different people in the book who take history into their hands. Right? You have you've got a long and wonderful chapter on Ben Hecht, and what's his line about history? He ran into history, or history ran into him. I mean, he's a famous screenwriter, a famous novelist. I was just looking at the list of screenplays he wrote, screenplays he's not uncredited for writing, and it's just amazing. But here's a guy who feels that, oh, wait a second, in spite of everything I'm doing, in spite of my fame, in spite of my career, this is really important. And so that again, that's just one of the great things about the book.
Ben Hecht was a literary phenomenon. At
Mm.
age 27, when he published his first novel, became recognized as a literary figure
Mm.
nationally. He single-handedly created the gangster movie back in the beginning of the 20th century, which became one of the
I'd
principal.
forgotten that he wrote Scarface. I'd
He
forgotten
wrote
about that. I mean, a classic, and of course, remade as a classic. I'd forgotten all about that. Huh.
And he wrote Broadway plays.
Mhm.
He wrote 250 short stories. He wrote additional novels, but had nothing to do with Zionism or even the Jewish community for his first 40 years. And the line that you're recalling, Lee, is that he said that just one day he was walking down the street and he bumped into
Yeah,
history
right. Right.
in the form of Peter Bergson, who was a young Jabotinsky
Mm,
follower who came to America in 1940 to work with Jabotinsky to try
mm,
and build a Jewish army to join the fight against Hitler. And this was 1940 when America was frozen in isolationism and was the last place you would think to come to try and encourage people to form a military force to fight Hitler. And it was the last place because all of Europe had been taken over
You're right.
by
Right.
Hitler, and Britain was under attack. It wasn't certain it would survive. So America was the place to
Mm,
come, and Heck joined this fight. He wrote extraordinary things. He gave speeches. He wrote plays, and he is an extraordinary example of two things. One, what an individual can do and how it
mm,
can affect history. And second, how we don't remember even recent history, much less history
mm,
from further back. And perhaps third, that we should, because the things he did, along with the things the other people in this book did, are part of the world we inhabit right now. And we should know about it, appreciate it, and carry it forward. Brandeis, who's one of the other figures
yeah,
in the book, he always said that history is a heritage, and we are charged
mm,
to carry it on because others in the past have borne that burden so well.
mm,
So history is not just something that happened in the past.
mm.
It's as Faulkner said, it's not dead. It's not even
It's not in the
past.
past, right?
It's with us right now,
Right.
and but it can't have an effect if we don't know it. And David McCullough said the same thing about
Mm,
American history, that we had forgotten America, younger generations in America had forgotten what America brought
mm,
to the world, what the history of America was, the ideals that were
mm,
incorporated in the founding documents, what the founders did. And you have to appreciate that heritage or you will lose it. If you don't realize you have a heritage and that it's priceless and that it's
mm,
up to you to continue it, you will lose it. So what McCullough said about American history is the same thing about Jewish history, that you need to know it and
mm,
appreciate it in order to be able to carry it forward. And the more you know, the more you appreciate not only what's been given to us, but the obligation we have to continue it on and pass it to the next generation.
I mean, the Jews are an extraordinary case, though. No, I mean, we're talking about a history, and this is what Zionism is. No, I mean, we're talking about not only thousands of years of history, but 2,000 of years of separation from Jerusalem, right? So to keep that, and then to see that revived by the different people that you speak about in your book, I mean, that's extraordinary. That's a different sort of thing.
It is extraordinary, and but it comes from the book. That's the common heritage of all of us in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And you're right; it goes back at least 2,500 years. And the thing about the Jews, and Ruth Weiss has explicated this so well in her book "Jews and Power," is that when the Jews were lost their temple in the land of Israel. 2,500 to 2,000 years ago, they didn't blame others. They blamed themselves. They thought they hadn't sufficiently fulfilled the covenant that they had with God. And so that was the origin of next year in Jerusalem and adhering to the Torah, the Jewish Bible. And that was a tradition that was passed on every single year. And so you don't forget history when you have rituals that convey it from one generation to another. And that's the key, because if you, as I say, if you forget your history, you've forgotten your identity. You forget your identity, you forget your role in the world. You forget your role in the world, it's going to be taken over by others who have a better understanding of either history or what they want to do to change it. So if there's one lesson that I was trying to convey in this book, is that history is not simply about the past. It is about the present and the future. And it's not simply about knowing these big themes which will make people's eyes glaze over. It's about knowing what individuals did because they committed themselves to doing something. And we're in an even better position because we have the heritage they bequeath to us. And we have much more power, freedom, and security than they did. And so we have a moral and historical, and some would say religious obligation to carry forward what we've been given. And when you see these 8 different individuals, 4 from America, 4 from Europe, different on different continents, coming together, not as a group, but coming together by taking what they've been given and then taking it forward. It's an inspiring story. It's fascinating to read what they did. But part of the lesson that I think I'm trying to convey by telling their stories is that we too have a role to play. It's not the Jews don't believe in the end of history. We don't believe that there's a right side that you simply have to be on in order to accomplish something. We have an obligation to take things forward, given what we've been given.
That's great. Our strength, the strength of any people is their history and their ability to remember it and their ability to revive it. We're going to cut away for 1 second. Join us if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube. We're going to make the jump exclusively to Epoch TV. You don't want to miss it because we're going to speak about one of the subjects in Rick's book in particular. This is a show about writers and books, and this is one of the most remarkable writers with one of the most remarkable careers in all of world history. We're going to pick that up right when we come back, less than a minute. Make sure you make the jump and watch me and Rick Richman. Fantastic book, fantastic conversation. See you in a second. The center of corruption is the Department of Justice. Charles Grassley has been going after them, identifying how the FBI and DOJ withheld evidence from the American people, from Congress, for 6 years regarding Biden family corruption. Where is the rest of Congress?
Senator Grassley, and joined by Chairman Comer, who's on the House side, they wrote a letter basically to the FBI and said, we are aware of the existence of a form that contains allegations regarding a bribery scheme involving Joe Biden himself. Then it turns out, hey, the document's real. They got it. There were 17 phone calls that the source had recorded involving Joe Biden or Hunter Biden talking about the bribery scheme. The FBI redacted that information to the American people. This is the FBI we're talking about. This is corruption of the president we're talking about. It's you get the documents, you get the witnesses, you get them under oath, you move forward. You don't play on their terms, you play on your terms.